Coming up, more than $1 million will be gifted to 16 groups. We'll hear about the Indigenous Earth Fund. And the only Indigenous county recorder in Arizona talks about voter intimidation. Plus, Oklahomans running for office. I'm Aaliyah Chavez. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is honored to be a supporter of Indian Country Today. Working with award-winning professors, Cronkite students learn news reporting, social media, shooting and editing videos, and producing content for communications industries. Cronkite's 15 professional programs give students the opportunity to cover critical issues throughout the U.S. and beyond. Learn more at cronkite.asu.edu.
This is the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez.
Go'atsi Hopa. Thank you for joining us. We start in Alaska, where after 3 years, the largest gathering for Native people in the state returned at the end of October. The Alaska Federation of Natives annual convention brought in thousands of delegates and participants from across the state to address critical issues of public policy and government for the Alaska Native community. Discussions on subsistence, the missing and murdered Indigenous women's crisis, boarding schools, and more took place. ICT's Mackenzie Allen Charmley was there to cover the event.
The Alaska Federation of Natives annual convention returned in person for the first time since going virtual due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The AFN conference brought big crowds. Over 140,000 Native people were represented from all parts of the state. The convention serves as the leading forum and voice of Alaska Natives in addressing issues of public policy and government. Julie Kitka, president of AFN, kicked off the event with gratitude.
You see, I have a lot of thank yous because we work with people, right? So
even political celebrities, including Secretary of the Interior Deb Haaland and State Representative Mary Peltola, made an appearance where many rallied in support for Peltola in this upcoming election.
Usually our best leaders are unifiers, and Alaska is full of leaders who exemplify unifying people and unity.
The theme of the conference this year is celebrating our unity, and with people traveling from all over the state, that couldn't be more true. From artists and exhibits to workshops and family, AFN's gathering continues to strengthen Alaska Native communities. The most popular event was Guyana Nights, meaning thank you in Yupik, which included traditional dancers from 14 groups throughout Alaska. Through the years, the cultural celebration has helped restore traditional dances and is now a treasured highlight of every convention. The conference ended with its staple statewide candidates forum, promoting an underlying message of the conference: to get out and vote. Candidates for the U.S. Senate, U.S. House, and gubernatorial races answered questions about current issues to inform Alaskan voters. And like many successful Indigenous gatherings, this one ended with smiles, laughs, and hugging ways. In Anchorage, Alaska, Mackenzie Allen Charmley for ICT News.
In California, tribes are reacting to an online sports betting measure. The age-verified Tribal Online and In-Person Sports Wagering Regulatory Act, or Proposition 27, is highly opposed by California tribes. However, an initiative proposed by San Manuel, Rincon, and Wilton tribes was written to be a safer alternative to the out-of-state commercial operators Prop 27. It would ensure that the introduction of sports wagering in California was led by tribes that have decades of experience in regulating gaming. Statewide tribal coalition called Californians for Tribal Sovereignty and Safe Gaming released a statement of intent to push forward in their efforts to defeat Prop 27. The coalition has dedicated more than $100 million in statewide broadcast, television, and digital advertising to alert Californians about the proposition. Well, the Indian Health Service is expanding its services to meet the needs of Indigenous patients. This week, IHS announced the expansion of telehealth across its federal facilities for American Indian and Alaska Natives. In July 2021, the federal agency awarded a clinical video telehealth contract that enables patient to provider and provider to provider meetings. Since then, IHS has been working with staff and engineers to prepare for the launch. This platform will be available for multiple devices and allows televideo visits in places with low broadband availability. Navajo Nation citizen and Indian Health Service Director Rosalind So says they are looking forward to being able to help more of Indian country. As of this week, IHS clinicians and support staff at federal facilities are now able to use the secure system. In Australia, a collection of storybooks are helping to tell tales of Indigenous culture. Early childhood years are important to a child's development, but you can't be what you can't see. Reading materials that tells the stories of Australia's Indigenous communities have been hard to find, but the Our Yarning initiative is changing that. The program is providing children's storybooks about Indigenous Australian cultural experiences. Cultural advisor and Fulbright scholar Julie Owen says showing Indigenous families living normal lives is important.
Growing up, I had no books that reflected my life, my culture, my country. I've never seen a story about somebody from my culture doing just the normal things family does.
The books are available online for all Australians and can be downloaded for people who don't have internet access. And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. Sixteen Indigenous-led organizations are being granted more than $1 million to help them with their climate change and conservation campaigns. The funds are being gifted by the Decolonizing Wealth Project Fund and Liberated Capital. This is the first group of grantees for what's being called the Indigenous Earth Fund. Here to explain the work of the groups is Edgar Villanueva, the founder of the project and the author of the best-selling book Decolonizing Wealth. Welcome, Edgar.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
So tell us about some of the groups that are receiving funding.
We're so excited to support in our first round of funding 16 organizations across the U.S. who are led by Native American leaders who are on the front lines of building power in our communities to fight against climate change and to protect and conserve our communities. These are all organizations that have solutions to the issues facing Mother Earth, and through our funding are able to elevate their platforms, organize communities, extend their voice and the reach of their efforts to address the current climate crisis. We received proposals from 36 communities. Unfortunately, we were only able to fund 16, but they are doing fantastic work. Groups like the Affiliated Tribes of the Northwest Indians in Portland, Oregon, Bears Ears in Sacramento, Indian Country Grassroots Support in Farmington, New Mexico. In every corner of this country, we're supporting fantastic work. And we're excited about coming this fall, we're going to be able to extend an additional $1 million for a total of $2 million towards Native-led work in this really, really critical area.
Edgar, I'm wondering if you can tell us why this grant funding is so important for these groups and maybe a little bit more about the timeline of when the work that they're working on will come to life.
It's really important. We know that despite contributing the least to this crisis and having ancient and traditional solutions as Native folks, we receive the least amount of philanthropic support for our efforts to address climate change. Right now, climate is the most popular issue in philanthropy. Millions upon millions of dollars are flowing towards organizations that are addressing the climate change, yet we know that so little of those dollars get to Native American organizations, although we are on the front lines of bringing solutions to this problem. And so that's why we launched this fund, is to disrupt that flow of capital, to both resource our organizations and our leaders who are doing this work across the United States, and also to elevate the narrative that we as Native people have the solutions that are critical to addressing the climate crisis in this country and around the world.
And tell us about the timeline of these groups in their work.
The timeline, the folks are engaged in the work as we speak. Many of these are groups who have been doing climate work for a long time on with really small budgets. We're hoping to just bring additional capacity and infrastructure. The first round of grants were awarded last fall, so people have been engaged in their campaigns and work for about a year now. And we're moving quickly into a second year of work and support for these organizations later this year.
You mentioned earlier that there was a large number of people who applied for these grants, but only, a handful were selected. Maybe tell us about the selection process for these groups that were funded.
Great question. We have an advisory committee comprised of all Native American folks who are experts on climate policy, on movement building, on advocacy, who we heavily rely on to make decisions about where to allocate resources. The truth is we would like to fund all the proposals that come in, but funding is contingent on our ability to raise resources. We're doing a pretty good job and hope to expand our capacity to raise more so we can deploy more resources. We know that $1 million, now $2 million, is a drop in the bucket for what's needed and what is deserved by these organizations. But we do rely heavily on our advisors to help us direct, and we look to move the resources to organizations who are addressing the most urgent needs, who have demonstrated capacity and leadership, and are bringing a power building advocacy angle to their campaigns that they are addressing.
I have a question for you for groups who might be wanting to apply for these grants in the future, or similar grants, as you mentioned, philanthropy being so low in funding projects in Indian country. What tips or advice do you have for those groups to really stand out from the rest?
I think it's really important that we lean in and embrace our indigeneity, right? Often foundations have a theory of change or an approach to solutions that are grounded in Western science and data. Not altogether bad, but we as Native people have very unique approaches using our worldview as Native people to addressing problems in our community. And this is in terms of climate, but this is also when we think about food sovereignty, when we think about homelessness, when we think about suicide prevention. The culture that we share across the communities of natives in this country is something that is central and vibrant and really important for how we approach problem solving. And I think that's something that we have to be really steadfast about holding on to. And that makes us unique and really sets us apart from how others are addressing problems.
Well, Edgar, thank you so much for telling us about the grantees of the Indigenous Earth Fund.
Absolutely. Thank you.
With just days to go before the midterm elections, some voting officials are dealing with a lot of animosity. In Arizona, the largest county in the state, Maricopa County, voters complained of being intimidated when they started dropping off their ballots in October. Joining us today is Gabriela Casares Kelly. She's the Pima County recorder, which is near Maricopa County in Arizona. Hi, Gabriela.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start off. Are you witnessing any kinds of voter intimidation in your county?
Here in Pima County, we are not seeing any of this. We do not have ballot drop boxes that are unstaffed. We do have early voting sites. However, at all of our early voting sites, we have been reporting nothing but satisfied, excited, determined voters. That isn't an issue here in this county. But I will say we are feeling the impact of that. We have had more people calling our office to ask about safety. We have people making comments at the early voting sites about militia groups. It is definitely something that we're feeling, even though it hasn't impacted here exactly.
This, of course, is your first midterm election since being elected to the Pima County Recorder's Office. Maybe talk about what you've been experiencing. I mean, none of us have any experience rolling out voting for thousands of people, so I'm really curious what your experience has been like.
Well, first of all, this has been a dream job for me. I first got involved with this office as a whole simply because I was working at a tribal community college and wanted to register students, and were having a really hard time with issues particular to Native communities. When I would even ask a voter, are you registered to vote? They would often say, for tribal elections or for like the president. So not knowing the difference, and every single interaction required a civics lesson. And so taking that and recognizing that, we push so hard for people to vote, but oftentimes we don't recognize the systemic barriers that are in place to even get them to register to vote. So the primary function of this office is voter registration. We are maintaining the voter rolls, and it's very complex and requires a lot of education because every single person is different. Every single person has different identification, different cards, different situations. We've gotten a lot of calls from truckers this week. Where do they register to vote? They're on the road the majority of the time. They sleep in their truck. What happens for somebody like that who wants to participate?
We heard in an earlier newscast this week about a proposition in Arizona that voters are actually voting on that essentially, based on our understanding, would make it harder for Native people to vote with tribal IDs. What can you tell us about that?
Yes. So this has been an ongoing issue. Here in Arizona, we have 22 distinct tribal nations. We have a really high population of Native people here in this state, and we still have Arizona legislators who don't understand what a tribal ID is or the need for a tribal ID in the communities that we are serving. The Thonaltham Nation, the largest reservation in my county, the reservation is the size of Connecticut, and there is no motor vehicle division anywhere close by. So for anybody who is needing a driver's license, it's a 2.5 hour, 3 hour drive one way. And that's if their family has a family vehicle. A tribal ID is something that would be available within their own community. It is something that is heavily regulated within the community, and it should be something that shows who they are and that they are a citizen of this nation as one of the first peoples of this nation. But it is not listed as a primary form of identification, it's only listed as a secondary. The other issue has been the difficulty of registering, or online services are only limited to people with driver's licenses. So connectivity issues or non-standard addresses, it goes on and on and on. But what this proposition is asking is for either that driver's license number or someone's social security number. We have problems with people simply wanting to put their phone number on the envelope in case we have a question. People are very concerned about their privacy. To have them asked to put their birth date or their social security card number or any of those things is such a violation of their privacy, and it doesn't add anything meaningful to the security of the verification process. So it's not helpful for the voter, and it deters more people from participating.
Speaking about encouraging voters to show up at the polls or to drop off their, absentee ballot, if there was a voter here who needed a little bit of a push, what would you say to them in terms of getting out there on November 8th?
I would always share, there's a lot of people who can't vote, especially in the Native community. We have people who have struggled with identification issues. But we ourselves in Arizona, we haven't had the right to vote until 1948. We didn't have the freedom to freely participate until the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And we didn't have language protections for Inhoribat, who Bismash Kamirganyok, for somebody like my grandmother who didn't speak English until the mid 1970s. And so when we think about the starting line of who can participate and who can't, we have to recognize that we have to start, our starting line is much further than others. And the very first thing we can do is to show up and to see what the process looks like, to encourage our family members to show up, to talk with one another. That's our strength as people, to let people know what they can expect. And make sure that you get out there, because there's a lot of our brothers and sisters, our relatives who are not able, because of incarceration, because of identification, because of a million other things, who can't participate. So if voting it's not the most important thing you can do, I like to tell people it's the least that you can do if you have the right. And then we need you to get involved.
Well, Gabriela Casares Kelly, we know you're incredibly busy, so thank you so much for making the time to be with us today.
Of course, thank you.
There's a number of Native Americans running for state and federal office in Oklahoma, including Cherokee citizen Kevin Stitt, who wants another term in office as governor. Navigator's global partner, John Tasuda, joins us now with his predictions. Welcome back, John.
Thanks. I always enjoy talking about these fun issues.
Well, let's just jump right in here and talk about the gubernatorial race in Oklahoma. What's standing out to you right now?
Well, so you take a look at the field. As you mentioned, Kevin Stitt, the incumbent governor, is a member of the Cherokee Nation. But across the state, Oklahoma has approaching 9% of the population of the entire state are enrolled citizens of tribes, which is a huge number of voters in a state like that. Also means that there's a great deal of diversity among the Native American voters in that state. And I think Mr. Stitt sort of points that out. It's not a monolithic group of voters. Mr. Stitt has had a very, let's be honest, antagonistic relationship with the tribal leaders. At a first blush, I think people would assume that he would be receptive to tribal leaders and working with the tribes, but that has not been at least part of his governor administration during his first term. Remains to be seen if he can improve on that. On the other side, his opponent has really reached out to the tribal leaders. So she's not Native American, but has had a long history. She's been a superintendent of education for the state and has worked with the tribes on education issues. Had a lot of long-standing relationships there, and has really worked hard to bring that to the forefront and talk about how important the tribes are in the state to all the issues: economic, education, cultural, tourism, all these issues. And she's really highlighted how beneficial the tribes are to the state, and would make that part of her administration. So I think that's been really a big boost to her unexpectedly. What's being called one of the closest governor races in the country, in a state that routinely votes very heavily Republican. So I think from the tribal perspective, that's very positive. That it's become a part of the race. And even if Mr. Stitt pulls it out, wins its second term, you would hope that he would take notice of that and reach out more to the tribal leaders and be more receptive to their views. If you're in Oklahoma, you can see TV commercials run locally by a lot of the tribes. They talk about how they just want to be a part of the state. Their economies in the state and the lives of their citizens are entwined with the citizens of Oklahoma who are not Indian, and they just want to contribute to everybody. And I think that would be a powerful story for him if he could turn that in his second term, turn that relationship around.
We saw in October that some of the tribes in Oklahoma actually endorsed Democrat Joy Hoffmeister for governor, and that, of course, goes against the current governor, Kevin Stitt, as you just mentioned. Do you think that endorsement from tribal leaders will result in tribal citizens who are going to vote for Joy Hoffmeister, or what is your prediction?
Well, so the tribes there do a great job of trying to turn out voters within the tribe and get them to participate in the polls. They try to get the message out that it's very important, not just to them as residents and citizens of Oklahoma, but as citizens of their tribal nations, that these relationships with the state are very, very important. So at least in the polling, it looks like it's having a significant impact. Again, the tribal population in Oklahoma is very big compared to most other states, and it can have a big impact on election outcomes. But it's a diverse group. There's a lot of very conservative Native Americans that live in Oklahoma. They tend to be a rural population. So the sort of normal conservative issues, distrust of government, wanting to protect rights to own guns, et cetera, are important to them as well. And so they have a diverse set of views and often split those and don't vote in a monolithic fashion. But in this case, I think the tribal leaders have done a great job of putting this relationship between the state and the tribes at the forefront of this and made that sort of the selling point in this race.
Well, John, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.